All the way down and bring the cameras up, and welcome to another Sunday night edition of Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. How you doing? How is everyone doing this beautiful fall night? Welcome to the first day of fall. I'm excited. I'm excited to watch, as a photographer, go out, get some nice shots of the fall weather. Pumpkin spice is back. Yay. Right, and sit back with some good books. And that is what we are here for you every Sunday night live on Twitch TV, and also being sent over to, on tape delay, to YouTube. And welcome to everybody watching on YouTube. I am Joel K. This is Accessibly Live Book Club Reading Room. This is where we take public domain books, we read. I am one of those who is vehemently against the banning / burning / both of books that people say that they have the right to tell you what to read. And it's like, no. You have every right to be your own judge and jury, and not somebody with an agenda to put forward. So what we do here is we read, just like we did back in elementary and high school, or elementary school, where we would go to the library and the librarian would read books to you and show you the pictures. What we do here is we're reading public domain books. These are books by authors who have created brilliant works of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, sonnets, everything to make your day enjoyable by diving into a book with a lot of great characters and a lot of storytelling. That's what we do here. That's what we've been doing for over a year and a half. And we are continuing to do so, and we will continue to do so, and we welcome you all here. Tonight, we are continuing the story in the next 4 chapters of G.Wells' classic adventure, The Island of Dr. Moreau. It was one of his finest books. Wells, born in England in 1866, his writings were extensive in both the areas of fiction and nonfiction genre. His writings conjured early ideas of flight, the internet, atomic warfare, and wireless communications. His nonfiction, however, satire, political commentary, history, and science, plus much more works appreciated in all venues of learning. His influence of H.G. Wells is vast, including many of his peers in writing at the same time as him, including Jules Verne, who is also in public domain, Mark Twain as well, Mary Shelley, Carl Jung, and Jonathan Swift, and many, many more. As I mentioned earlier, 3 things that H.G. Wells predicted in his books: Men on the Moon, email, alternate realities, the atomic bomb. The last, I know we could probably have done without, but it is what it is. So let's jump into it. This is the next 4 chapters of H.G. Wells's The Island of Dr. Moreau, here on Twitch TV's only Accessibly Live, the book club reading room. Chapter 8. The crying of the puma. Montgomery interrupted my tangle of mystification and suspicion about 1 o'clock, and his grotesque attendant followed him with a tray bearing bread, some herbs, and other edibles, a flask of whiskey, a jug of water, and 3 glasses and knives. I glanced askance at this strange creature and found him watching me with his queer, restless eyes. Montgomery said he would lunch with me, but that Moreau was too preoccupied with some work to come. Moreau, said I. I know that name. The devil you do, he said. What an ass I was to mention it to you. I might have thought. Anyway, it will give you an inkling of our mysteries. Whiskey? No thanks. I'm an abstainer. I wish I had been, but it's no use locking the door after the steed is stolen. It was that infernal stuff which led me to my coming here. That, and a foggy night. I thought myself in luck at the time, but Moreau offered to get me off. It's odd. Montgomery, said I, suddenly as the outer door closed, why has your man pointed ears? Damn, he said, over his first mouthful of food, stared at me for a moment, and then repeated, pointed ears? Little points to them, said I as calmly as possible, as a catch in my breath, and a fine black fur at the edges. He helped himself to whiskey and water with great deliberation. I was under the impression that his hair covered his ears. I saw them as he stooped by me to put that coffee you'd set on the table, and his eyes shone in the dark. By this time, Montgomery had recovered from the surprise of my question. I always thought, he said deliberately, with a certain accentuation of the flavoring of his lisp, that there was something the matter with his ears, from the way he covered them. What were they like? I was persuaded from his manner that his ignorance was pretense. Still, I could hardly tell the man that I thought him a liar. Pointed, I said. Rather small and furry. Distinctly furry. But the whole man is one of the strangest beings I have ever set my eyes on. A sharp, hoarse cry of animal pain came from the enclosure behind us. Its depth and volume testified to a puma. I saw Montgomery wince. Yes, he said. Where did you pick up the creature? San Francisco. He's an ugly brute, I admit. Half-witted, you know. Can't remember where he came from. But I'm used to him, you know. We both are. How does he strike you? He's unnatural, I said. There's something about him, don't think me fanciful, but it gives me a nasty little sensation, a tightening in my muscles when he comes near me. It's a touch of the diabolical, in fact. Montgomery had to stop eating while I told him this. Rum, he said. I can't see it. He resumed his meal. I had no idea of it, he said, and he masticated. The crew of the schooner must have felt it the same. Made a dead set against the poor fellow. You saw the captain? Suddenly the puma howled again, this time more painfully. Montgomery swore under his breath. I had half a mind to attack him about the men on the beach. Then the poor brute within gave vent to a series of short, sharp cries. Your men on the beach, said I. What race are they? Excellent fellows, aren't they? He said absent-mindedly, knitting his brows as the animal yelled out sharply. I said no more. There was another outcry worse than the former. He looked at me with dull gray eyes, and then took some more whiskey. He tried to draw me into a discussion about alcohol, professing to have saved my life with it. He seemed anxious to lay stress on the fact that I owed him my life. I answered him distractedly. Presently, our meal came to an end. The misshapen creature with pointed ears cleared the remains away, and Montgomery left me alone in the room again. All the time he had been in a state of ill concealed irritation at the noise of the vesicated puma. He had spoken of his odd want of nerve and left me to the obvious application. I found myself at the cries I found myself that the cries were singularly irritating, and they grew in depth and intensity as the afternoon wore on. They were painful at first, but their constant surgence at last altogether upset my balance. I flung aside a crib of Horace as I'd been reading, and began to clench my fists, to bite my lips, and pace the room. Presently, I got to stopping my ears with my fingers. The emotional appeal of those yells grew upon me steadily, grew at last to such an exquisite expression of suffering that I could stand it in the confined room no longer. I stepped out of the room into the lubrous heat of the late afternoon and walked past the main entrance, locked again, I noticed, turned the corner of the wall. The crying sound even louder out of the doors. It was if all the pain in the world had found a voice. Yet yet I had known such pain was in the next room, and had it been dumb, I believe I have thought since, I could have stood it well enough. When suffering finds a voice and sets our nerves quivering, that this pity comes troubling us. But in spite of the brilliant sunlight and the green fans of the trees waving in the soothing sea breeze, the world was a confusion, blurred with drifting black and red phantasms until I was out of earshot of the house in a checkered wall. Chapter 9. The Thing in the Forest. I strode through the undergrowth that clothed the ridge behind the house, scarcely heeding whither I went, passed on through the shadow of the thick cluster of straight stemmed trees beyond it, and so presently found myself some way on the other side of the ridge, and descending towards a streamlet that ran through a narrow valley. I paused and listened. The distance I had come, or the intervening masses of thicket, deadened any of the sound that was coming from the enclosure. The air was still. Then, with a rustle, a rabbit emerged, and went scampering up the slope before me. I hesitated and sat down in the edge of the shade. The place was a pleasant one. A rivulet was hidden by the luxuriant vegetation of the banks, save at one point, where I caught a triangular patch of the glistening water. On the farther side, I saw through the bluish haze a tangle of trees and creepers, and above these again the luminous blue of the sky. Here and there a splash of white or crimson marked the blooming of some trailing epithet. I let my eyes wander over this scene for a while, and began to turn over in my mind again the strange peculiarities of Montgomery's man. But it was too hot to think elaborately, and presently I fell into a tranquil state midway between dozing and waking. From this I was aroused after I know not how long, by a rustling midst the greenery on the other side of the stream. For a moment I could see nothing but the waving summits of the ferns and the reeds. Suddenly, upon the bank of the stream appeared something. At first I could not distinguish what it was. It bowed its round head to the water and began to drink. Then I saw it was a man, going on all fours like a beast. It was clothed in bluish cloth and was of a copper-colored hue with black hair. It seemed that grotesque ugliness was an variable character of these islanders. I could hear the suck of the water as his lips as he drank. I leaned forward to see him better, and a piece of lava detached from my hand went pattering down the slope. He looked up guiltily, and his eyes met mine. Forthwith, he scrambled to his feet and stood wiping his clumsy hand across his mouth, regarding me. His legs were scarcely half the length of mine, of his body, so staring one another out of countenance, we remained for perhaps the space of a minute. Then, stopping to look back once or twice, he slunk off among the bushes to the right of me, and I heard a swish of the fronds grow faint in the distance and die away. Long after he had disappeared, I remained sitting up staring at the direction of his retreat. My drowsy tranquillity had gone. I was startled by a noise behind me, and turning around, I saw the flapping white tail of a rabbit vanishing up the slope. I jumped to my feet. The apparition of this grotesque, half-bestial creature had suddenly populated the stillness of the afternoon for me. I looked around me rather nervously and regretted that I was unarmed. Then I thought that the man that I had just seen had been clothed in bluish cloth, but had been naked as a savage would have been, and I tried to persuade myself from the fact that he was, after all, probably a peaceful character, that the dull ferocity of his countenance belied him. Yet I was greatly disturbed at the apparition. I walked to the left of the slope, turning my head about and peering this way and that among the straight stems of the trees. Why should a man go on all fours and drink with his lips? Presently I heard an animal wailing again, and taking it to be the puma, I turned about and walked in a direction diametrically opposite of the sound. This led me down to the stream which I had stepped, and pushed my way through the undergrowth beyond. I was startled by a great patch of vivid scarlet on the ground, and going up to it, found the peculiar fungus branched and corrugated like the fallacious lichen, but deliquescing into slime at the touch. And then, in the shadow of some luxuriant ferns, I came upon an unpleasant thing: the dead body of a rabbit, covered with shining flies, but still warm, with the head torn off. I stopped aghast at the sight of the scattered blood. Here at last was one visitor to the island disposed of. There were no traces of another violence about it. It looked as though it had been suddenly snatched up and killed. And as I stared at the little furry body, came the difficulty of how the thing had come done. The vague dread that had been in my mind since I'd seen the inhuman face of the man at the stream grew distracter as I stood there. I began to realize the hardiness of my expedition among these unknown people. My thicket about me became altered to my imagination. Every shadow became something more than a shadow. Became an ambush. Every rustle became a threat. Invisible things seemed watching me. I resolved to go back and to the enclosure on the beach. I suddenly turned away and thrust myself violently, possibly even frantically, through the bushes, anxious to get clear space about me. I stopped just in time to prevent myself from emerging upon an open space. It was a kind of glade in the forest, made by a fall. Seedlings were already starting to come up, struggling for vacant space. And beyond, the dense growth of stems and twining vines and splashes of fungus and flowers grew in again. Before me, squatting together upon the fungoid ruins of the huge fallen trees, and still unaware of my approach, were three grotesque human figures. One was evidently a female, the other two were men. They were naked, save for a swath of scarlet cloth about their middle, and their skins were of a dull pinkish drab color, such of I had seen in no savages before. They had fat, heavy, chinless faces, retreating foreheads, and scant, bristly hair upon their heads. I never saw such bestial looking creatures. They were talking, or at least one of the men was talking to the other two, and all three had been closely interested in to heed the rustling of my approach. They swayed their heads and shoulders from side to side. The speaker's words came thick and sloppy, and though I could hear them distinctly, I could not distinguish what he said. He seemed to me to be reciting some complicated gibberish. Presently, his articulation became shriller, and spreading his hands, he rose to his feet. At, at that, the others began to gibber in unison, also rising to their feet, spreading their hands, and swaying their bodies in rhythm with their chant. I noticed then the abnormal shortness of their legs and the lank, clumsy feet. All three began to circle around, waving and stamping their feet, waving their arms. A kind of tune crept into their rhythmic recitation, and the refrain, Alula, or Balula, it sounded like. Their eyes began to sparkle, and their ugly faces to brighten with an expression of strange pleasure. Saliva dripped from their lipless mouths. Suddenly, as I watched their grotesque and unaccountable gestures, I perceived clearly for the first time what it was that had offended me, and had given me the two inconstant and conflicting impressions of utter strangeness, and yet of the strangest familiarity. The three creatures engaged in this mysterious rite were human in shape, and yet human beings with the strangest air about them of some familiar animal. Each of these creatures, despite its human form, its rags of clothing, and the rough humanity of its body form, had woven into its movements, into the expression of its countenance, into the whole expression, came now irresistible suggestion of a hog, a swinish taint, an unremarkable mark of beast. I stood overcome by this amazing realization, and then the most horrible questionings came rushing to my mind. They began leaping in the air, first one and then the other, whooping and grunting. Then then one slipped, and for a moment was on all fours to recover, indeed forthwith. But the transitory gleam of the true animalism of these monsters was enough. I turned as noiselessly as possible, and becoming every now and then rigid with the fear of being discovered as a branch creaked or a leaf rustled, I pushed back into the brush. It was long before I grew bolder and dared to move freely. My only idea for the moment was to get away from these foul beings, and I scarcely noticed that I had emerged upon a faint pathway amidst the trees. Then suddenly, traversing the little glade, I saw with an unpleasant start two clumsy legs among the trees, walking with noiseless footsteps parallel with my course, and perhaps 30 yards away from me. The head and upper part of the body were hidden by a tangle of creeper. I stopped abruptly, hoping that the creature did not see me. A foot stopped as I did. So nervous was I that I controlled an impulse to headlong flight with the utmost difficulty. Then, looking hard, I distinguished through the interlacing network the head and the body of the brute. I had been seen drinking. He moved his head, and there was an emerald flash in his eyes as he glanced at me from the shadow of the trees. Half luminous color that vanished as he turned his head again. He was motionless for a moment, and then, with a noiseless trend, began running through the green confusion. In another moment, he had vanished behind some brush. I could not see him, but I felt he had stopped and was watching me again. What on earth was he? Man or beast? What did he want with me? I had no weapon, not even a stick. Flight would be madness. At any rate, the thing, whatever it was, lacked the courage to attack me. Setting my teeth hard, I walked straight towards him. I was anxious not to show the fear that seemed chilling my backbone. I pushed through the tangle of the tall white flowered bushes and saw him 20 paces beyond, looking over his shoulder at me and hesitating. I advanced a step or two, looking steadfastly into his eyes. "Who are you?" said I. He tried to meet my gaze. "No," he said suddenly, and went bounding away from me through the undergrowth. Then he turned and stared back at me again. His eyes shone brightly out of the dusk underneath the trees. My heart was in my mouth, but I felt my only chance was bluff, and walked steadily towards him. He turned again and vanished into the dusk. Once more I thought I caught a glimpse of his eyes, and that was all. For the first time I realized how the lateness of the hour might affect me. The sun had set some minutes since, and swift dusk of the tropics was already fading out of the eastern sky, and a pioneer moth fluttered silently by my head. Unless I spend the night among the unknown dangers of the mysterious forest, I must hasten back to the enclosure. The thought of a return to that pain-haunted refuge was extremely disagreeable, but it was still more as an idea of being overtaken in the open by darkness and all the darkness might conceal. I gave one more look into the blue shadows that had swallowed up this odd creature, and then retraced my way down the slope towards the stream, going as I judged in the direction from which I came. I walked eagerly, my mind confused with many things, and presently found myself in a level place amongst scattered trees. The colorless clearness that comes after the sunset flushed was darkling. The blue sky grew momentarily deeper, and the little stars, one by one, pierced the attenuated light. The interspaces of the trees, the gaps in the further vegetation, and that had been hazy blue in the daylight, grew black and mysterious. I pushed on. The color vanished from the world. The treetops rose against the luminous blue sky in the inky silhouette, and all below me that outline melted into one formless blackness. Presently the trees grew thinner and the shrubbery undergrowth more abundant. There was a desolate space covered with white sand, and then another expanse of tangled brush. I did not remember crossing the sand opening before. I began to be tormented by a faint rustling upon my right hand. I thought at first it was fancy for whatever. I stopped there as silence, save for the evening breeze in the treetops. Then, when I turned to hurry on again, there was an echo to my footsteps. I turned away from the thickets, keeping to more to the open ground, and endeavoring by sudden turns now and then to surprise something in the act of creeping up upon me. I saw nothing, and nevertheless, my sense of another presence grew steadier. I increased my pace, and after some time came to a slight ridge, crossed it, and then turned sharply, regarding it steadfastly from the further side. It came out black and clear cut against the darkling sky, and presently a shapeless lump heaved up momentarily against the skyline and vanished again. I felt assured now that my tawny faced antagonist was stalking me once more, and coupled with that was another unpleasant realization that I had lost my way. For a moment I hurried on, hopelessly perplexed and pursued by that stealthy approach. Whatever it was, the thing either lacked the courage to attack me, or it was waiting to take me at some disadvantage. I kept studiously to the open. At times I would turn and listen, and presently I had half persuaded myself that my pursuer had abandoned the chase, or was a mere creation of my own disordered imagination. Then I heard the sound of the sea. I quickened my footsteps almost to a run, and immediately there was a stumble in my rear. I turned suddenly and stared at the uncertain trees behind me. One black shadow seemed to leap into another. I listened, rigid, and heard nothing but the creep of my blood in my ears. I thought that my nerves was unstrung, and that my imagination was tricking me, and turned resolutely towards the sound of the sea again. In a minute or so, the trees grew thinner, and I emerged upon a bare, low headland running out into the somber water. The night was calm and clear, and the reflection of the growing multitude of the stars shivered in the tranquil heaving of the sea. Some way out, the wash upon an irregular band of the reef shone with a pallid light of its own. Westward, I saw the zodiacal light mingling with the yellow brilliance of the evening star. The coast fell away from me to the east, and in the west it was hidden by the shoulder of the cape. Then I recalled the fact that Moreau's beach lay to the west. A twig snapped behind me, and there was a rustle. I turned and stood facing the dark trees. I could see nothing, or else I could see too much. Every dark form in the dimness had its ominous quality, its peculiar suggestion of alert watchfulness. So I stood for perhaps a minute, and then, with an eye to the trees still, turned westward to cross the headlands, and as I moved, one among the lurking shadows moved to follow me. My heart beat quickly. Presently, the broad sweep of the bay to the westward became visible, and I halted again. The noiseless shadow halted a dozen yards from behind. A little point of light shone on the further bend of the curve, and the gray sweep of the sandy beach lay faint under the starlight. Perhaps 2 miles away was that little point of light. To get to the beach, I would have to go through the trees where the shadows lurked and down a bushy slope. I could see the thing rather more distinctly now. It was no animal, for it stood erect. At that, I opened my mouth to speak and found a hoarse phlegm choked my voice. I tried again and shouted, "Who is there?" There was no answer. I advanced a step. The thing did not move, only gathered itself together. My foot struck a stone. That gave me an idea. Without taking my eyes off the black form before me, I stood and picked up a lump of rock. I had at my notion the thing would turn abruptly, as a dog might have done, and slunk obsequiously into the further darkness. Then I recalled a schoolboy expedient against big dogs, and twisted the rock into my handkerchief, gave it a turn around the wrist. I heard a movement further off in the shadows, as if the thing was in retreat. Then suddenly my tense excitement gave way. I broke into a profuse precipitation and fell a trembling with my adversary routed and this weapon in my hand. It was some time before I could summon the resolution to go down through the trees and bushes upon the flank of the headlands to the beach. At last I did it as a run, and as I emerged from the thicket upon the sand, I heard some other body come crashing after me. At that I completely lost my head with fear and began running along the sand. Forthwith there came with the swift patter of soft feet in pursuit. I gave a wild cry and redoubled my pace. Some dim black things were about 3 or 4 times the size of rabbits were running or hopping up from the beach towards the bushes as I passed. So long as I live, I shall remember the terror of that chase. I ran near the water's edge and heard every now and then the splash of the feet that gained upon me. Far away, hopelessly far, was the yellow light. All the night was about us was black and still. Splash, splash came the pursuing feet, nearer and nearer. I felt my breath going for as I was quite out of training. It whooped as I drew it, and I felt like a knife at my side. I perceived the thing would come up with me long before I reached the enclosure, and, desperate with sobbing for my breath, I wheeled around upon it and struck at it as it came to me. The stone came out of the sling of my handkerchief as I did so. As I turned, the thing which had been running on all fours rose up on its feet, and the missile fell fair on its left temple. The skull rang out, and the animal man blundered into me, thrust me back with his hands, and went staggering past me with a headlong upon the sand, and his face into the water, where it lay still. I could not bring myself to approach that black heap. I left it there with the water rippling around it, under the still stars, and giving it a wide berth, pursued my way towards the yellow glow of the house. And presently, with a positive effort of relief, came the pitiful moaning of the puma, the sound that had originally driven me out to explore the mysterious island. At that, though I was faint and horribly fatigued, I gathered together all my strength and began running again towards the light. I thought I heard a voice calling me. Chapter 10. The Crying of a Man. As I drew near the house, I saw that the light shone from the open door to my room, and then I heard coming out of the darkness at the side an orange oblong of light, the voice of Montgomery shouting, "Frederick!" I continued running. Presently I heard him again, and I replied a feeble "Hello." In another moment he had staggered up to me. "Where have you been?" he said, holding me at arm's length, so that the light of the door had fell on my face. Sorry, guys. We have both been so busy that we forgot all about you until a half hour ago. He led me into the room and sat me down on the deck chair. For a while I was blinded by the light. We did not think of you would start to explore this island of ours without telling us, he said, but then I was afraid, but... What? Hello. My last remaining strength slipped from me, and my head fell on his chest. I think he found a certain satisfaction in giving me brandy. For God's sake, said I, fasten that door. You've been meeting some of our curiosities, eh? He said. He locked the door and turned to me again. He asked me no questions, but gave me some brandy and water and pressed me in to eat. I was in a state of collapse. He said something vague about his forgetting to warn me and asked me briefly when I left the house and what I had seen. I answered him briefly, in fragmentary sentences. Tell me what it all means, said I, in a state bordering on hysterics. It's nothing so very dreadful, he said, but I think you have had enough for one day. The puma suddenly gave a sharp yell of pain. At that he swore under his breath. I'm damned, said he. This place is not as bad as Gower Street with its cats. Montgomery, said I, what was that thing that came after me? Was it a beast or was it a man? If you don't sleep tonight, he said, you'll be off your head tomorrow. I stood up in front of him. What was that thing that came after me? I said. He looked me squarely in the eyes, and he twisted his mouth. His eyes, which had seemed animated for a minute before, went dull. From your account, he said, I'm thinking it was a boggle. I felt a gust of intense irritation, which passed as quickly as it came. I flung myself into the chair again and pressed my hands into my forehead. The puma began again once more. Montgomery came around me and put his hands on my shoulder. Look here, Pendrick, he said. I had no business to let you drift out into that silly island of yours. But it is not so bad as you feel, man. Your nerves are worked to rags. Let me give you that something that will help you sleep. That will keep you for hours yet. You must simply get some sleep, or I won't answer for it. I did not reply. I bowed forward and recovered my face from my hands. Presently he returned with a small measure containing a dark liquid. This he gave me. I took it unresistingly and helped me into the hammock. When I awoke, it was broad day. For a little while I lay flat, staring at the roof above me. The rafters, I observed, were made of the timbers of a ship. Then I turned my head and saw a meal prepared for me on the table. I perceived that I was hungry and prepared to clamber out of the hammock, which, very politely anticipating my intention, twisted around and deposited me on the floor, upon all fours of the floor. I got up, sat down before the food. I had a heavy feeling in my head, and only the vaguest memory first of things that happened overnight. The morning breeze blew very pleasantly through the unglazed windows, and the food contributed to a sense of animal comfort which I experienced. Presently the door behind me, the door inward towards the yard of the enclosure, opened. I turned and saw Montgomery's face. All right, he said, I'm frightfully busy. And he shut the door. Afterwards, I discovered that he forgot to relock it. Then I recalled the expression of his face the previous night, and with all the memory of that had experienced reconstructed itself before me. Even as that fear came back to me, became a cry from within. But this time it was not the cry of the puma. I put down the mouthful that hesitated upon my lips and listened. Silence, save for the whisper of the morning breeze. I began to think my ears had deceived me. After a long pause, I resumed my meal. But with my ears still vigilant, presently I heard something else, very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all that had hitherto heard from the abominations behind the walls. There is no mistake this time in the quality of the dim, broken sounds. No doubt of all their source, for it was a groaning, broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time. It was a human being in torment. As I realized this, I rose and in 3 steps had crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard, and flung it open before me. "Prendrick, man, stop!" cried Montgomery, intervening. A startled deerhound leapt up and snarled. There was blood, I saw, in the sink, and the smelt a peculiar smell of carbolic acid. Then, through an open doorway beyond, in the dim light of the shadow, I saw something bound painfully upon the framework, scarred, red, and bandaged, and then blotting out this appeared. Yes, I know. And then blotting out appeared the face of old Moreau, white and terrible. In the moment, he had gripped me by the shoulder with a hand that was smeared red, had twisted me off my feet, and flung me headlong back into my room. He lifted me as though I were a little child. I felt at full length upon the floor, and the door slammed and it shut out of passionate intensity of his face. Then I heard the key turn in the lock, and Montgomery's voice and exclamation. "Ruined the work of a lifetime," I heard Moreau say. "He doesn't understand," said Montgomery, and other things that were inaudible. "I can't spare the time yet," said Moreau. The rest I could not hear. I picked myself up and stood trembling, my mind a chaos of the horrible misgivings. Could it be possible? I thought it was a thing of the visitation of men I was carried here. The question shot like lightning across the tumultuous sky, and suddenly the clouded horror of my mind condensed into a vivid realization of my own danger. I'm not sure, guys, if that went through earlier. We look like we froze up here on the channel. I apologize about that. One of those problems with OBS that it has occasional problems. But let's continue. Final chapter for the evening. Chapter 11. The Hunting of the Man. It came before my mind with an unreasonable hope of escape that the outer door of my room was still open to me. I was convinced now, absolutely assured, that Moreau had been vivisecting a human being. All the time since I had heard his name, I had been trying to link in my mind in some way the grotesque animalism of the islanders with his abominations. And now I thought I saw it all. The memory of his work on the transfusion of blood occurred to me. These creatures I had seen were the victims of some hideous experiment. These sickening scoundrels had merely intended to keep me back, to fool me with their display of confidence, and I presently to fall upon a fate more horrible than death. With torture, and after torture of the most hideous degradation it was possible to conceive, to send me off a lost soul, a beast, to the rest of their Camus route. I looked around for some weapon. Nothing. Then, with an inspiration, I turned over the desk chair, putting my foot on the side of it, and tore off the side rail. It happened that a nail came along with the wood, and projecting gave it a touch of danger to an otherwise petty weapon. I heard a step outside and incontently flung open the door and found Montgomery within a yard of it. He meant to lock the outer door. I raised the nail stick of mine and cut his face, but he sprang back. I hesitated a moment, and he turned and fled around the corner of the house. "Pendrick, man!" I heard his cry. "Don't be a silly ass, man." Another minute, thought I, and he would have locked me in, and have ready as a hospital rabbit for my fate. He emerged behind the corner, for I heard him shout, "Pendrick!" and then began to run after me, shouting things as he ran. This time, running blindly, I went northeastward towards the direction at right angles to my previous expedition. Once, as I went running headlong up the beach, I glanced over my shoulder and saw his attendant with him. I ran furiously up the slope over it, and turning eastward along a rocky valley fringed on either side of the jungle, I ran for perhaps a mile altogether, my chest straining my heart, beating in my ear, and then hearing nothing of Montgomery or his man, and feeling upon the verge of exhaustion, I doubled sharply back towards the beach, as I judged, and lay down in the shelter of the canebrake. There I remained for a long time, too fearful to move, and indeed too fearful to even plan a course of action. The wild scene about me lay sleeping silently under the sun, and only the sound near me was the thin hum of some gnats that had discovered me. Presently, I became aware of a drowsy breathing sound, the sawing of the sea upon the beach. After about an hour, I heard Montgomery shouting my name. Far away to the north, that set me thinking of my plan of action. As I interpreted it, this island was inhabited by only of these two visitors and their animalized victims. Some of these, no doubt, could be pressed into their service against me if need arose. I knew Moreau and Montgomery carried revolvers, and, save for the feeble bar of a deal spiked small nail, the merest mockery of a mace, I was unarmed. So I lay there. Still, I began to think of a food and drink, and at thought of the real hopelessness of my position, came home to me. I knew no way of getting anything to eat. I was too ignorant of botany to discover any resort of root or berry that might lie about me. I had no means of trapping a few rabbits upon the island. It grew blanker the more I turned the prospect over. At last, in desperation of my position, my mind turned to the animal men I had encountered. I tried to find some hope in what I remembered of them. In turn, I recalled each one of them I had seen, and tried to draw some augury of assistance from my memory. Then suddenly I heard a staghound bay, and at that realized a new danger. I took little time to think, or they would have caught me then, but snatching up my nailed stick, rushed headlong from my hiding space towards the sound of the sea, and remembered a growth of thorny plants with spikes that jabbed like penknives. I emerged bleeding and with torn clothes upon the lip of a long creek opening northward. I went straight into the water without a minute's hesitation, wading up the creek and presently finding myself knee deep in the little stream. I scrambled out at last on the westward bank, and with my heart beating loudly in my ear, crept into the tangle of the ferns to await the issue. I heard the dog, there was only one, draw nearer and yelp when it came to the thorns. Then I heard no more, and presently I began to think I had escaped. The minutes passed. The silence lengthened out, and at last, after an hour of security, my courage began to return to me. By this time, I was no longer very much terrified or very miserable. I had, as it were, passed the limit of terror and despair. I felt now that my life was practically lost, and that persuasion made me capable of daring anything. I had even a certain wish to encounter Moreau face to face. And as I had wandered into the water, I remembered that if I were too hard pressed, at least one path of escape from torment lay still open to me, that they could not very well prevent my drowning myself. I had half a mind to drown myself then, but an odd wish to see the whole adventure out, an odd, impersonal, specular interest in myself restrained me. I stretched my limbs, sore and painful from the pricks of the spiny plants, and stared around me at the trees, and so suddenly that it seemed to jump out of the green trackery about me, my eyes lit upon the black face watching me. I saw that it was the simian creature who had met the launch upon the beach. He was clinging to an obelisk stem of palm tree. I gripped my stick and stood up facing him. He began chattering. You, was all I could distinguish at first. Suddenly he dropped from the tree, and in another moment was holding the fronds apart and staring at me curiously. I did not feel the same repugnance toward this creature which I had experienced in my encounters with the other beastmen. You, he said, in the boat. He was the man, then, at least as much as the man as Montgomery's attendant, for he could talk. Yes, I said. I came in the boat, from the ship. Oh, he said, and his bright, restless eyes traveled over me to my hands, to the stick I was carrying, to my feet, to the tattered places in my coat, to the cuts and scratches I had received from the thorns. He seemed puzzled at something. His eyes came back to my hands, and he held out his hand out and counted digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eh? I did not grasp his meaning then. Afterwards, I was trying to find a great proportion of the beast people had malformed hands, lacking something even 3 digits, but guessing this was his in some way a greeting. I did the same thing by way of reply. He grinned with immense satisfaction. Then his swift roving glance went around again. He made a swift movement and vanished. The fern fronds he had stood between came swishing together. I pushed out of the brake after him, and was astonished to find him swinging cheerfully by one lank arm from the rope of the creepers that loomed down from the foliage overhead. His back was to me. "Hullo," said I. He came down with a twisting jump and stood facing me. "I say," said I, "where can I get something to eat?" Eat, he said. Eat man's food now. And his eyes went back to the swinging of the ropes. At the huts. But where are the huts? Oh, I am new, you know. At that, he swung around and set off at a quick walk. All his motions were curiously rapid. Come along, he said. I went with him to see the adventure out. I guess the huts were some rough shelter where he and some of the other beast people lived. I might perhaps find them friendly, find some of them in their minds to take hold of. I did not know how far they had forgotten their human heritage. My ape-like companion strode along by my side, with his hand hanging down by his jaw thrust forward. I wondered what memory he might have in him. How long have you been on the island? Said I. How long? He asked, and he, having the question repeated, held up 3 fingers. The creature was a little better than an idiot. I tried to make out what he meant by that, and it seemed I bored him. After another question or two, he suddenly left my side and went leaping at some fruit that hung from the trees. He pulled down a handful of prickly husks and went on eating the contents. I noted this with satisfaction, for here at least was a hint for feeding. I tried him with some other questions, but his chattering, prompt responses as often as quite not across purposes with my questions. Some few were appropriate, others quite parrot-like. I was so intent upon these peculiarities that I scarcely noticed the path we followed. Presently we came to trees, all charred and brown, so to a bare place covered with yellow-white incrustations, across which a drifting smoke, pungent in the whiffs to nose and eyes, went drifting. On our right, over a shoulder of bare rock, I saw the level blue of the sea. The path coiled down abruptly into a narrow ravine between 2 tumbled and knotty masses of blackish coral. In this we plunged. It was extremely dark, this passage, after the blinding sunlight reflected from the sulphurous sounds. Its walls were steep and approached each other. Blotches of green and crimson drifted across my eyes. My conductor stopped suddenly. Home, he said, and I stood in the floor of a chasm that was at first absolutely dark to me. I heard some strange noises and thrust my knuckles of my left hand into my eyes and became aware of disagreeable odor, like that of a monkey's cage ill cleaned. Beyond, the rock opened again upon a gradual slope of sunlit greenery, and on either hand light smote down through a narrow ways into the central gloom. We are continuing the incredible journey of Hendrik upon the island of Dr. Moreau. We have seen his struggle and realization to what is going on the island, and we see maybe a glimpse of hope. Next week, Chapter 12, The Sayers of the Law, on the island of Dr. Moreau. Hope you guys are enjoying this. As I mentioned a couple minutes ago, we have occasionally a computer malfunction here dealing with OBS, the program that sends this show out over the system live on Twitch. So occasionally you get this stupid little freeze frame of a kid going like this, which looks really stupid, but it is what it is, unfortunately. We continued on. If you missed anything, this show is actually being put onto YouTube. Just look up Joel K underscore OG and you can find it. And you can find all the chapters that you're missing that you have been wanting to watch or listen to. We do this show every Sunday, and we do this for the enjoyment, and I do this with a lot of fun. And I appreciate everybody coming in and watching and enjoying the story. Island of Dr. Moreau is one of G.Wells' finest stories. He's done so many. And the characters, the storytelling, the adventure that he brings out in his writing is incredible. And I hope you're enjoying it. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every single Sunday night live on Twitch and then also appearing on YouTube. And I appreciate everybody stopping in. Like we do on our Thursday night show, which is the conversation station we do here, we do a couple quotes during the show and one closing quote at the end of each night. And this is the one I want to share with you tonight from last Thursday. Every human interaction is sacred. We reduce other people we encounter to a role in our minds. We miss that sacredness. When we take our time and live in the now, we share a bond with every person we come in contact with. The great Don Jose Ruiz. Every human interaction is sacred. When we reduce other people we encounter to a role in our minds, we miss that sacredness. When we take our time and live in the now, we share a bond with every person we come in contact with. Hey, Tiger, how are you doing tonight? Thank you for stopping in. Don't forget, if you missed any of the show, we are here in replay, and we are also on YouTube. And how do we find us? Well, here's our email right here, Joel K underscore OG. Take this first half and type that into YouTube, and you'll find yours truly there. I appreciate everybody stopping in. I want to thank Tiger for stopping in again. It's good to see you. Thank you for stopping in. This is Accessibly Live, the book club reading room, every single Sunday night live on Twitch with an occasional hiccup from the OBS system, unfortunately. But we hope you're still stopping in to say hello. I'm going to let you go. We will see you Thursday night for the Conversation Station right here, live, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, live. And don't forget, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, Sunday, for next week, Chapter 12, Sayers of the Truth. The next chapter in the Island of Dr. Moreau. Be well, be safe, be kind. Please, with everybody going back to school, there's going to be people who could use a friend. Don't forget to put your hand out and say hi. How are you doing? Or you want to do Joey from Friends. How you doing? And just have some fun. And with all the craziness out there nowadays, guys, it's nice to get things better. I'm going to get out of here. Take care, all. We will see you all next Sunday for the next chapter. And we will see you this coming Thursday for the Conversation Station. Take care, you guys. Have a good one. Bye-bye.